what if I told you the smartest thing you could do for your garden this season is deliberately plant food for pests? Not for you, for them. On purpose, right next to your vegetables. That sounds insane. Everything in your instinct says, keep pests out, fight them off, build a wall between them and your food. And yet, one of the most effective pest control strategies the Amish have ever used does the exact opposite. It invites pests in. It gives them what they want. And the vegetables growing just a few feet away stay almost completely untouched. This is trap cropping. And once you understand why it works, you will never look at your garden layout the same way again. Here's the problem with how most of us deal with pests. We wait until they show up on our food crops, then we react. We spray, we pick, we panic. But by then, the pests have already chosen those plants. They have laid eggs, they are established, you are playing defense on their terms. The Amish figured out something different. Instead of waiting for pests to find your best plants, you give them something they like even more. Plant it where you want them to go. The pests find the trap crop first, settle in, and never bother crossing over to the vegetables. Redirecting a pest is 100 times more effective than fighting one. I learned this about 10 years ago on an Amish property in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. A man named Jacob was giving me a tour of his garden, and I noticed something that made no sense. There was a row of nasturtiums along the south border of his vegetable beds, and those nasturtiums were absolutely covered in aphids. I mean, plastered. Every leaf, every stem, coated in tiny green insects. It looked like a disaster. I pointed at it and said, "You have got a serious problem over there." And Jacob just laughed. He said, "That is not a problem. That is the plan." Then he walked me over to his pepper plants growing about 4 feet from those nasturtiums. Not a single aphid. His tomatoes, right behind the peppers, completely clean. His beans, untouched. Every valuable crop in the garden was pristine. And the nasturtiums were taking all the damage on purpose. Jacob said something I have repeated to hundreds of gardeners since that afternoon. He said, "You cannot keep them out, so you give them what they want somewhere else." I have over 50 years of gardening experience and a Master Gardener certification, and I had never once considered this approach. I had spent decades trying to eliminate pests entirely, which is like trying to stop rain. The Amish were not trying to stop them. They were steering them. And it was working better than anything I had ever sprayed. The science behind trap cropping confirms what the Amish observed for generations. Most garden pests navigate by chemical signals. They smell their way to dinner. But they respond most strongly to the strongest signal. If you plant something a pest prefers even slightly more than your vegetable crop, and you place it where the pest encounters it first, the pest locks onto the trap and ignores the rest. University research has confirmed that strategic trap crops can reduce pest damage by 50 to 90% depending on the pairing. This is established integrated pest management. The Amish just got there first by a few hundred years. Trap cropping is not random. You cannot scatter flowers and hope for the best. The power is in specific pairings, placement, and timing. Let me walk you through the 5 most effective pairings I use. Everyone borrowed from Amish gardens and confirmed in my own beds. This is the pairing Jacob showed me, and it is the one I recommend every gardener start with because it is the easiest, the most reliable, and the most dramatic. Aphids are one of the most common garden pests in every zone. They attack peppers, tomatoes, beans, squash, brassicas, almost everything. And they multiply at a terrifying rate. A single aphid can produce dozens of offspring in a week without even mating. That is why an aphid problem seems to appear overnight. But aphids love nasturtiums more than almost any vegetable in your garden. Given the choice, they will colonize nasturtiums first, and once they settle in, they stay. The nasturtiums become an aphid magnet that pulls them away from your food. Here's how to set it up. Plant nasturtiums along the outer border of your vegetable beds, about 6 to 8 inches from the edge of the bed itself. You want them close enough that incoming aphids encounter the nasturtiums before they reach your vegetables, but not so close that the nasturtiums compete for root space. Direct sow the seeds about 2 weeks before your last frost date, or start them indoors and transplant. They grow fast and bloom prolifically. Within a few weeks of the aphids arriving in your area, you will see them congregating heavily on the nasturtiums. And here is the part that takes nerve. You leave them there. You do not spray the nasturtiums. You do not pull them. You let the aphids have their feast, because while they are feasting on the trap, they are ignoring your peppers. I set this up my first season after visiting Jacob's farm, and the results were so obvious it almost felt like cheating. My pepper plants, which had been aphid magnets for years, were completely clean. The nasturtiums looked terrible, and that was exactly the point. A bonus benefit Jacob did not even mention. Those aphid-loaded nasturtiums become a feeding station for ladybugs and lacewing larvae. The beneficial insects show up because the food is concentrated in one place, and once they establish, they patrol the entire garden. So the trap crop is not just redirecting pests, it is recruiting predators. If you have ever grown zucchini, butternut, or any cucurbit, you know squash bugs and squash vine borers. Squash bugs suck the life out of leaves and stems. Vine borers tunnel inside the stems and collapse the plant from within. They are two of the most destructive pests in the home garden, and once they are inside a stem, no spray on earth can reach them. But here is what the Amish discovered through generations of observation. Squash bugs and vine borers have a strong preference hierarchy among squash varieties, and at the top of that hierarchy sits Blue Hubbard squash. They prefer Blue Hubbard over nearly every other cucurbit by a wide margin. University of Connecticut research confirmed this, finding that Blue Hubbard attracted squash bugs at significantly higher rates than other varieties planted nearby. Here's how the Amish use it. They plant Blue Hubbard squash as a perimeter crop around the outside edges of the main squash and zucchini beds, about 8 to 10 feet from the nearest food crop. The vine borers and squash bugs find the Blue Hubbard first, colonize it, and leave the zucchini and butternut alone. I plant 3 or 4 Blue Hubbard hills around the border of my cucurbit area every season. Those plants take heavy damage. Vine borers riddle the stems. Squash bugs cluster on the leaves, and my zucchini plants, right in the center, grow through August without a single borer tunnel. Before I started doing this, I lost at least half my squash plants to vine borers every year. In the last 8 seasons using Blue Hubbard as a trap, I have lost 2 plants total. Now, you do not have to let the Blue Hubbard die. You can check the stems for borer entry holes, slit the stem carefully with a knife, remove the larva, and mound soil over the wound. The plant often recovers. Or you can simply let the Blue Hubbard absorb the damage and sacrifice it. Either way, your food crop stays clean. Flea beetles are those tiny jumping beetles that chew hundreds of small round holes in your brassica leaves. They attack kale, broccoli, cabbage, arugula, and Asian greens. The damage is mostly cosmetic on mature plants, but on seedlings, a heavy flea beetle attack can kill young transplants before they get established. The Amish interplant radishes among their brassicas, and it works beautifully. Flea beetles prefer radish leaves over most other brassica crops. They gravitate to the radishes and leave the cabbage and kale alone, especially during the critical seedling stage when the plants are most vulnerable. Here is the setup. When you transplant your cabbage, broccoli, or kale seedlings, direct sow radish seeds in between them, about 4 to 6 inches from each transplant. The radishes germinate fast, within 4 or 5 days, and their leaves emerge right as flea beetles are most active in spring. The radishes draw the flea beetle damage to themselves. Your brassica seedlings get the window they need to establish strong root systems and put on enough leaf growth to tolerate minor damage later. And here is the practical bonus. You can still harvest the radish roots. Flea beetles eat the leaves, but leave the roots untouched. So you get a usable crop and pest. Protection in the same planting. I have used this interplanting method for 7 seasons, and my brassica seedling survival rate went from roughly 60% to over 90%. The radishes look chewed up. The kale looks perfect. Exactly as planned. Stink bugs and leaf-footed bugs are a growing problem across much of the country, and they are particularly destructive on tomatoes, peppers, and beans. They pierce the fruit with their needle-like mouthparts and leave behind discolored, dimpled spots that ruin the harvest. And they are nearly impossible to control with sprays because their hard shell protects them. The Amish plant tall sunflowers along the border of the garden, and it turns out stink bugs and leaf-footed bugs are strongly attracted to sunflower heads. They congregate on the developing seed heads in large numbers, clustering there instead of moving into the vegetable rows. Plant a row of tall sunflower varieties. Mammoth or Russian giant work well along the south or east edge of your garden. Space them about 12 to 18 inches apart and let them grow to full height. As the flower heads develop and begin forming seeds, stink bugs and leaf-footed bugs will gravitate toward them. The sunflowers serve double duty. They attract pest insects away from your vegetables, and they attract beneficial insects to your garden. Sunflower pollen feeds lacewings, parasitic wasps, and hoverflies. So while the stink bugs are clustering on the seed heads, the beneficial insects are building their populations using the same plant. One trap crop doing 2 jobs. I added a sunflower border 3 seasons ago after seeing it on 2 separate Amish farms. The stink bug damage on my tomatoes dropped noticeably the first year. By the second year, I was finding clusters of 20 or more leaf-footed bugs on the sunflower heads and almost none on my tomato plants. If you grow any brassica crop, you know the cabbage white butterfly, that innocent-looking white butterfly, fluttering around your garden is laying eggs on your cabbage and broccoli, and those eggs hatch into voracious green caterpillars that can strip a plant to the stem. Harlequin bugs, the black and orange shield-shaped bugs, are equally destructive on brassicas. Mustard greens are a brassica, but they send out a much stronger chemical signal than cabbage, kale, or broccoli. Cabbage moths and harlequin bugs find mustard irresistible. Plant a row of mustard greens about 3 to 4 feet from your main brassica bed, and the moths will lay the majority of their eggs on the mustard instead of your food crop. Giant red mustard is the variety I use because it grows fast, produces large fragrant leaves, and sends out a strong signal. Direct sow it about 2 weeks before you transplant your cabbage or broccoli, so it is already established and broadcasting its scent when the moths arrive. Here is what you will see. The mustard leaves will be covered in tiny yellow eggs and eventually caterpillars. Your cabbage growing a few feet away will have dramatically fewer. On Amish farms I have visited, the mustard rows often look devastated by midsummer, while the food brassicas look clean and productive. One management note. Once the mustard is heavily infested, you have options. You can leave it and let parasitic wasps find the caterpillars, which they will. You can pull the plants and compost them, removing a large population of pests from the garden in one action. Or you can replace them with a fresh planting to continue the trap through the rest of the season. The Amish families I have spoken with tend to pull and compost once the trap is loaded, then replant if needed. This is the question every gardener asks, and it is important. What do you do with a trap crop that is covered in pests? You have 3 options, and the Amish use all of them depending on the situation. Option 1, leave it. If the trap crop is doing its job and the pests are staying put, let nature take its course. Predators will find the concentrated pest population. Ladybugs, lacewings, Parasitic wasps and birds will all show up to a buffet. This is the approach Jacob preferred. He said the nasturtiums were not just a trap. They were a feeding station for everything that eats aphids. Option 2. Remove and destroy. If the pest population is so heavy that you worry about overflow into the main garden, pull the trap plants and bag them for the trash, or drown them in a bucket of soapy water. Do not compost heavily infested plants if you are concerned about pest eggs surviving. Option 3. Replace. Pull the loaded trap crop and immediately plant a fresh one. This works well with fast-growing traps like nasturtiums, radishes, and mustard greens. You can cycle through 2 or 3 plantings in a single season, keeping a fresh trap available throughout the peak pest months. The approach you choose depends on the pest, the severity, and your comfort level. There is no single right answer, and the Amish vary their approach based on what they see in the garden that week. When you step back and look at the Amish trap cropping strategy as a whole, what you see is a garden surrounded by a ring of sacrificial plants. Nasturtiums along the south border, sunflowers along the east edge, blue Hubbard squash at the corners of the cucurbit section, mustard greens flanking the brassica bed, radishes tucked in between the seedlings. The food crops sit in the protected center, and the trap crops form a living perimeter that intercepts pests before they ever reach the harvest. That is not a random collection of flowers. That is a defense system designed around how pests actually behave. And it gets better every season as you learn your specific pest pressures and adjust your trap crop selection accordingly. I want to be honest about where trap cropping has limits. It is not a magic bullet. Some pests, like Japanese beetles, are not effectively redirected by any trap crop, because they are generalists that feed on hundreds of plant species without strong preferences. For those pests, other strategies like hand-picking or beneficial nematodes are more effective. Also, trap cropping works best when combined with healthy soil and good garden diversity. A trap crop planted in dead soil next to stressed vegetables will help, but not as much as the same trap crop in a thriving, biologically active garden. The Amish never rely on a single strategy. They stack trap cropping on top of soil health, rotation, and beneficial insect habitat. The stacking is what makes it powerful. And if you are gardening on a very small scale, a single raised bed or a balcony container garden, trap cropping is harder to implement because you need enough distance between the trap and the food crop for the redirect to work. In tight spaces, companion planting with repellent herbs may serve you better than trap crops. Remember those aphid-covered nasturtiums from the beginning? The ones I pointed at and called a serious problem? Here is what I understand now that I did not understand then. Those nasturtiums were not failing. They were succeeding. Every aphid on those leaves was an aphid that was not on Jacob's peppers. Every caterpillar on the mustard was one that skipped the cabbage. Every vine borer in the blue Hubbard was one that never found the zucchini. The Amish did not beat pests by fighting harder. They beat them by thinking smarter. They studied what pests want, and then they gave it to them, somewhere that did not matter. So here is my challenge. This spring, pick one trap crop pairing and try it. If aphids are your problem, plant a border of nasturtiums. If vine borers destroy your squash every year, put in a few hills of blue Hubbard around the perimeter. If flea beetles shred your brassica seedlings, tuck radishes in between them. Give the pests what they want, just not where it counts. And when you see those trap crops covered in insects while your vegetables sit clean and untouched a few feet away, you will finally understand what Jacob told me that afternoon in Lancaster County. You cannot keep them out, so you give them what they want somewhere else. And that changes everything.